Thanks very much, Bonnie. How do you relate to nature? I'm going to give you a few moments to think about this question. Hold on to your thoughts, and we're going to come back to those a bit later. For me, one of my earliest memories of nature and my relationship with it concerned Wales. I was a young girl, and with my brother and sister, used to run Save the Whales sales from our front garden, selling plants and bits and pieces to raise money for whales. And I certainly saw them as creatures with intelligence, emotion, and probably with a huge amount to teach us if we could only speak to them. As you came in today, you heard whales song. Isn't that incredible? Whales sing. And this discovery was made by someone called Robert Payne and his wife, Katie, back in the 70s. Sadly, Robert Payne has recently passed away, but he's left with him a real legacy. And it was so important that he made this discovery that whales could sing through his sonar equipment dragged through the ocean, and that the sounds they made were repeated and patterned and precise, much like human song. And this was important because it changed humans' perception of whales from some blubbery quick creature for some whale meat into an emotional, intelligent creature. And this led drive for change through laws and social action. So our perceptions of nature are absolutely key. And my recognition of the whale as an emotional creature could be termed in more academic terms as recognizing its intrinsic value, by which I mean its value in itself, separate to its value from humans. So intrinsic value underpins this concept of ecocentrism, basically a nature-centered system of values. So on one side, we have a triangle with the human at the top of the pyramid and separate from all the other creatures. And on this slide, it's labeled ego, but in other words, in more academic terms, we might call that anthropocentrism. On the other side, we have a green human amidst all the other species. And this is a much more realistic account of how nature works. We are another species. We rely on the other species to survive, and they rely on us not to continue with our destructive practices to survive as well. So ecocentrism and this nature-centered system of values underpins the rights of nature movement. When I was doing my research for this talk, I came across a whole array of language from countries across the globe which recognize an ecocentric perspective to nature. These are just a few of the words I came across. So we have words regarding Mother Earth, Pacha Mama from South America, Papa Tuanaku in Maori, Itbunu in India, and Asase Yuduru in Ghanaian. Please forgive my pronunciations, which I'm sure could be much improved. But the point I'm trying to make is that ecocentrism isn't something new. It's something that has been around a long time. It's particularly associated with indigenous peoples and local communities. And they are essential, their viewpoints, their relationship with nature, to learn from so that we can all live in harmony with nature or achieve in South America what they term sumac corsé. So I was advised when I was preparing for this presentation not to include much text on my slides, but you must forgive me because I'm a lawyer. So I haven't been able to resist including a definition. But don't worry, because I'm going to unpack it bit by bit with you, because this definition is key to rights of nature and the rights of nature movements. So the first part of the definition says rights of nature is a legal instrument. And in this context, we are focusing more on the legal side of things. So legal instruments take many forms. So rights of nature has been employed across the world through constitutions, statutes, through judges' interpretations of case law, local law. So there's many legal instruments that can embody rights of nature. The second part says that nature has inherent rights. So this again links back to that intrinsic viewpoint. Nature itself, not just humans, should possess inherent rights of themselves, separate to the human relationship. The third part talks about rights of nature, offering nature the same legal protection as people and corporations. So that's quite radical, and that's hence the topic of the talk was, is it a legal rebellion? Because it's quite radical to offer nature that same protection. And for some, perhaps people think, oh, it's too much. But remember, there were times when women didn't have rights, when slaves didn't have rights. Society progresses. And I certainly see this as necessary in order to address our climate and biodiversity crisis that we're suffering right now. So the last part of the definition talks about what rights nature should have. And these do vary according to different legal instruments, but generally the rights are to exist, thrive, and regenerate. So this is all good in theory. What's happening in practice? So here I've taken a snapshot from an excellent resource called the Eco-Jurisprudence Monitor. And it's one of the resources that I could play around for hours. Because how exciting is this? There are 467 documented uses of rights of nature around the world. It's not just limited to South America, where many people associate the rights of nature movement. It's all over. It's developing in North America. It's developing a little bit even in the UK, which I will speak to you about shortly. So this is a growing movement, and it's exciting because it challenges current unsustainable practices of humans right on and can make a difference. So I'm going to talk through a few examples of cases where rights of nature have been employed successfully. This case, the Los Cedros case, was based in Ecuador in 2021. And many of you will have heard of Professor Mika Peck, who works in the ecology department and who I work closely with on a couple of projects. And his collection of ecological data of the cloud forest in Ecuador was absolutely key in driving forward this case in Ecuador to try and protect the cloud forests from copper mining. So basically, Ecuador has quite strong legal provisions in relation to rights of nature. They are enshrined in the Constitution. And so the forest, or representatives of the forest, went to court and said, we have the right to exist. The copper mining cannot take place. And the case was successful. So how amazing is that? This whole area of very biodiverse forest, not only important for Ecuador, but for global biodiversity systems, was saved. And not only that, the court ordered that there would be a forest restoration plan for the areas that had been damaged through infrastructure development. So that was a real success story. Very popular within the rights of nature areas is protecting rivers through the rights of rivers. So I'm going to talk about this case in Colombia, although there are many I could have chosen from. There are rivers that have been protected in New Zealand, also in India. There's some development in the UK in relation to the rights of river. So the river Atrato in Colombia was heavily degraded through illegal mining practices. And a lot of the forests on the outskirts had also been lost, as well as the biodiversity within the river itself. And this impacted the local Afro-descendant communities who made a living from the river. So a case was brought to the court. And what was interesting here is that Colombia does not have rights of nature in its constitution, but the judges pushed the boundaries of the constitution to recognize the river as a legal body with rights. So we see the judges being quite creative in some of these decisions in pushing forward rights of nature. So the impact of that judgment, unfortunately, the river Atrato is still not in perfect condition. There is a lot of illegal mining, and with that comes corruption, danger, gangs. It's not that easy to stamp out, but the judgment did provide a basis to start some action, and also created a river guardianship body to potentially protect it in the future and create action plans to restore its biodiversity. So I mentioned developments in the UK. So right on our doorstep, in fact, right on my doorstep, I walk along this river every day. The River Ouse in Lewes has gained some attention in the press recently. And that's because the local community came together at the River Festival in Lewes and started thinking about how they could push forward and develop rights of the River Ouse. And rather perhaps unexpectedly have had some success. And the Lewes District Council have adopted a motion working towards recognising the rights of the River Ouse. It's only a political move, but all these steps count to get stronger and stronger before we have it in our laws. And we also have a Rights of Nature Bill going to be put through Parliament soon. Another area of nature which has been protected through rights of nature law are the rights of species. So in the Galapagos Islands, several sharks were illegally killed for their fins. And this case, again, very interesting, drawing upon the Ecuadorian constitution, actually criminally sanctioned the pilot of the ship and the people working on the ship and confiscated the ship. So a really strong judgment there in favour of nature. And then the last case I'm going to talk about concerns an even larger extension of the use of rights of nature to protect an individual species, one monkey. This is quite radical. So the case of Astrolita, which was the name of this domesticated woolly monkey, the facts are a little bit complicated. But basically, the judges considered whether they could use rights of nature in the constitution to protect this one monkey. And they found, yes, they could. The monkey is a unit of an ecological system, and therefore rights of nature is applicable here. They were keen to qualify this judgment, and they said it wouldn't apply to domestic species for human consumption, for example, or species that needed to be controlled, such as invasive alien species. So I'm going to bring you back to the beginning of this talk, where I asked you to think, to spend a quiet moment, which we don't often have in our lives, to think about your relationship with nature. And that's because that is key to change. Yes, we want legal systems, but in order to get those legal systems, we need individuals' attitudes to change towards more harmonious existence with nature. And the title of my talk says, "Can this legal rebellion save the world?" What do I think about that? Well, that's a big ask, isn't it? But I am certainly more optimistic than any other time in my life about change. I have studied environmental law and been interested in environmental law my entire life, and this is the most hope that I have seen through successes. That's not to say it's without complexities. It raises difficult questions, really difficult questions. And how do we implement it? We might get a successful judgment, like in the Colombian case, but what's going to happen next on the ground to actually make an impact? So these are all things I'm looking forward to considering a lot more in my future research, but I certainly have some hope. Thanks very much for listening.